right, good morning. I'm going to be sharing my experience with the COVID-19 pandemic. I love stories where everyone can be like, oh, I was here when that happened, I was there when that happened, and hearing where each person's own experience with that situation. A lot like 9/11, as tragic as it was, I find it very interesting that everyone can tell where they were. And I was too young to remember where I was at the time. I was in first grade and I don't remember. And so I just find those stories very interesting. And the COVID-19 pandemic is very similar, where everyone remembers where they were and how it affected their lives, because it affected everyone's lives so intently. And like, I was on a cruise a few months ago and I asked the cruise director, he did a Q&A session, and I asked him where he was when the COVID-19 pandemic hit and how it affected his life. And hearing his story, especially since he was on a cruise at the time, working on a cruise, was very interesting. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about my experience with the pandemic, and just to document it for my purposes in the future, to look back on it, my kids, historical purposes, whatever. I just think it'd be really interesting to have it documented. So it's been, almost 2 years. I'm not great at timelines, so it's a little fuzzy, but I'm gonna try my best to remember everything as best as I can. So let's get started. Let's see, January 2020, the last week of January 2020, I got in a wreck. It was the other person's fault. And the next day, my whiplash was so bad that I went to the urgent care to get x-rays and some medicine and stuff like that. So while I was there in the little examination room, I saw a sign on the door that said, if you have any symptoms of COVID-19, you need to let your nurses know or whatever. And this was in January. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, I think I've heard about that. There's been things like that have come to the US before, like Ebola. And I remember when that happened and there was like 6 cases in the US and everyone was freaking out, and it turned out to be nothing. And so I was like, oh yeah, I've heard of things like that before, like no big deal. So that was like my first, conscious thought that I remember about it. And then, so in this season, I was working as an assistant to the director of a group home in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And my parents and siblings and everyone lived about 30 minutes away. So we were pretty close. So one of my jobs was to lead missions teams. So we would have people come from all over the US in different groups of about 20 and come to the property, and they would work on projects and do stuff with the kids, and it was my job to like coordinate their on-campus activities, which I was super excited about. So we had a missions team come the first week of March, very first week of March, and it was wonderful. It was so fun. It was my first missions team ever. I had just taken over the program, and so it was just so fun. It was a dream job. I loved it. It was so great. And so they had a great week, and then they left. So now we're in the second week of March, and most of what I remember happened the second and third week of March. I personally consider the start of the pandemic to be March 13th. And so that was a Friday. So all of these things happened like the week before or the week after that Friday. So starting the Monday, the week before Friday the 13th. So that week is where I'm starting. So we come into work, and things are starting to heat up a little bit with this. Like, we've heard of a few more cases. Things are starting to get a little closer. I remember hearing, oh, it's in Texas now. Like, it's not just in Washington, it's in Texas. Oh, it's in Missouri. It's in Oklahoma. Like, it's getting closer to Arkansas. And then the first case that was reported that week was in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, which was about an hour and a half away from where we were. And my cousin's friend lives in Pine Bluff. And so I remember thinking, I even know somebody there. Like, this is so close. And then I think the second case was in Little Rock, maybe later that week, or maybe it was Hot Springs. It was close. And then Northwest Arkansas went crazy after that. But anyways, so that first case was in Pine Bluff, and we were like, oh my gosh, it's in Arkansas now, like it's actually here. And so I remember we were in a group email with the other Arkansas group homes from different agencies and organizations. There were several of them, and so we would all kind of stay in contact. And I remember one of them sent an email that was like, hey, what are you guys doing about your missions teams that are coming and these volunteer groups that are coming on campus? And this was early in the week, and I remember thinking, like, what do you mean? What are we doing? Like, they're coming. This is ridiculous. We're not doing anything. Everything's normal. And we were supposed to have another missions team come, I think the week following Friday the 13th. It was either that week or the next one, but it was like within a week or two. And I was like, they're coming, it's fine. Like, y'all are being ridiculous. Well, fast forward a few days, I think by like Wednesday, we decided to have a call with this missions team. And I think they were the ones that decided that they weren't gonna come. And we were like, yeah, that's probably best, you know, but we had so many other missions teams throughout the rest of the summer. So we were like, of course we're not gonna do anything with that, because at first it was just gonna be a few weeks of all of this. And so that missions team canceled. I have footage of what I did actual Friday the 13th. My boss was going on a trip like probably 2 weeks away, and he was flying, so we had to cancel that. The event was canceled, so we had to cancel his flight. And so I was on hold with Expedia for a few hours, and definitely could have been worse. For like a few hours is not that bad, but that's what I did the actual Friday the 13th. But all my words come back to me in shades of mediocrity, like emptiness and harmony. I need someone to comfort me. Help from the other side. I must have called 1,000 times. I have called like 1,000 times. Another thing I remember from that week is going to the grocery store, the Walmart neighborhood market that is just down the street from where we lived. And it was probably that Thursday or Friday, probably, and it was packed. Like, it was a madhouse, and carts were so full. And I remember seeing a nurse that had her cart really full, and just thinking like, oh my gosh, that she's a nurse. Does she know something we don't? Like, what should we be doing? And I did end up, again, I don't know if it was that week or the week after, I ended up buying water, like jugs of water. Well, I don't know why, but I bought water. And then I also bought stuff to make soups, because I was hearing that you got really sick with COVID-19 and that you had to quarantine, so nobody was gonna be able to come in and take care of me. And I was like, well, what if I get hungry and I am so sick I can't make anything? So I made 3 different types of soup and froze them in bags in the freezer, so that if I got sick and quarantined, I would have something to eat. So that was, you know, I kept them in the freezer for months, and then finally I think I ate some of them and threw some of them out because I never needed them. But that also happened. Then another thing that happened around that time, that 2-week period, is that I would have nightmares. Several nights I had nightmares about how you could tell that the world was changing rapidly, and that we would never go back to the world we knew before, which was so scary. And the thing is, we had no idea what was changing or how it was changing or how big of an impact it had had, and that was just really scary. And I remember thinking, yeah, we just have no idea how big of a deal this is going to be and how much of an impact it's going to make. And, you know, sure enough, it did. And it's interesting now seeing all the things that did change because of it that we had no way of knowing at the time. But another thing that happened during that time was the schools closing. So early the week of the Friday the 13th week, we were like, schools aren't gonna close, it's gonna be fine. And by Friday, they had decided, so they were supposed to have one more week of school after Friday the 13th, and then a week of spring break. And so they decided to just make spring break 2 weeks long. They were gonna take off the week before spring break week, and then come back after. As we all know now, they didn't go back at all that school year. But that was the original plan, was for 2 weeks. So as a group home, we've got all these teenagers and daycare's closed, and we had to make our own daycare, and all these kids came home, and it was crazy. It was crazy trying to figure out what we were gonna do and how we were going to homeschool all of these children who had really difficult behaviors and trouble even learning in normal school environments. Anyways, another memory that I have from that 2-week period is eating out. So the last time we went out to eat before everything shut down, we went to Chick-fil-A with my family. And this was the week of Friday the 13th, earlier in the week. And I remember it because they had already started to make COVID changes. And by that, I mean, part of what is called COVID logic is that the solution does not have to be better, it just has to be different. So if what you were doing before was more sanitary, but you haven't changed anything, then it's not better. It's so stupid. I remember I was in a church service once where instead of passing the offering bucket, they had everyone go up to the front to bring their offering and put it in the bucket. And I'm like, how do you know that passing a bucket is not going to be safer than everyone going up there together in a one big bunch? Like, there's no telling which one's different. There was no research to be done to see which protocols were better. It was just freak out time, do something. And do something they did. Every single place of employment and business and home and everyone just did something different. Like, it was beyond logical reasoning. It was just different, so it had to be better. But anyways, when we went to Chick-fil-A, they had done something different. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something about, maybe they had like bagged the food instead of putting it on trays, even though we were eating in, something like that. I don't remember, but I remember thinking, oh wow, so this is because of COVID. One of those first, like, because of COVID, this happened. The second thing I remember about eating out is that the governor shut down all of the restaurants to be takeout only. And he announced it one day that it was gonna start the next day. And it was like a Thursday or something. So I think it was the week after the 13th, but, and my parents called me. I usually only saw them on the weekends, and Chili's was like our go-to place. And they called me and they were like, hey, we just heard word that the governor's gonna shut down all the restaurants, so we're gonna go out to eat for one last time before this happens. We were not people that were like afraid of COVID. I mean, maybe that's bad, but like, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, they're gonna shut down the restaurants, let's not go anywhere. We were like, oh my gosh, they're gonna shut down the restaurant, let's go eat. So really our lives did not change very much. We never even really changed what we were doing for the pandemic, but we had to just accommodate the other people's changes. So anyways, they called me and they were like, hey, we're gonna go out to Chili's tonight since this is gonna be our last night and we don't know how long it's gonna be till we can go again. And they asked me if I wanted to go, but I decided not to and just stayed home that night. I didn't have to drive. So that was another memory. And then of course restaurants were shut down forever. I have a video of the first time I ever went to a restaurant again. So I'm at a real live, actual restaurant, sitting at a table. It feels nice to be back. And here at CC's, to fill up the drinks, there's a guy standing at the drink fountain to like fill up the cups and then pour it into your cup. And so I'm standing there waiting for my refill, and he's like, I'm sorry, this is so awkward. It's like, yeah, probably won't last long, but at least we're here. But anyways, back to that initial week. So I remember checking news stories. So I was trying to see like how many cases there were now, where it was, where the news case was, if it had hit our city yet, that sort of thing. And in that first week, I remember thinking about how if a news article was more than about 18 hours old, then it probably wasn't accurate. That's how fast things were changing. And so I was always looking to see if there was one that was just a few hours old to see what the most recent news was, because that's just how fast things were changing. It was crazy. And then after that first like initial week, our organization put together a COVID-19 task force, like a lot of organizations did, to try and figure out how we were going to handle it. It was really difficult for me. I didn't change a lot of what I did. I found a lot of people overreacting out of fear, and so some of those meetings were pretty hard for me to be involved in, because some of the things that were said were really crazy because people were just scared. But anyways, we would have a meeting at least once, I think twice a week for a while, to talk about what we were doing. And so since I was the assistant to the director, I would bring an update on what the news reports were saying. And one of those things that I did was every single day for probably 2 or 3 months, the governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson at the time, would do a COVID-19 briefing with the updated numbers, updated policies, daily briefings. That's how fast things changed. And so it was my job to watch that every day, and it was about 30 minutes. And then there was also an interpreter that was there every single day, and then a few other people that would be brought in frequently. And I got really close to them. I really enjoyed watching it, just because they would make jokes, and it was a fun thing to do, just to watch something for a little bit every day. And so I enjoyed doing that. I feel like I became friends with them and formed a close bond. What else? Also, one of the things that we did, I mean, this was, again, one of the very first week. I was put in charge of helping some of the kids to make masks, which again, was hard for me because I felt like everyone was kind of overreacting. But people started making masks, and then by May, when things started opening up more, people did require masks in places, and I bought some really cute masks at Old Navy. They started selling masks, and they had some really, really cute ones, and so for a long time I had my spring masks, and then I had to buy my fall masks, and then I had to wear my spring masks again when it came back to the next year. But some of them were really cute, and then I finally bought some disposable black masks, and I really liked those, and then I lost them in a move, but those were a lot easier to breathe in. Those masks were difficult. I didn't like them very much. What else? Homemade hand sanitizer. So although we never experienced a shortage of hand sanitizer, as a group home for foster children, people like to donate things. And so someone had donated a bunch of alcohol, a bunch of like isopropyl, like clinical alcohol to use since it was in a pandemic. They were thinking of us, which is great. But there was not really much we could do with just alcohol. So we were like, well, what do we do with this alcohol? And we were like, well, we could make, I'm missing a brush. Found it, this one. Okay, anyways. We were trying to decide what we were going to do with all this alcohol, and we decided that we would make our own hand sanitizer. Now, if you would have asked me in 2019 or any of the previous years, how do you make hand sanitizer, I would not have even known where to start. But thankfully, now I do. So we had to go buy aloe vera, and we bought them from like Dollar General and Walmart. I think Dollar General was our best bet most of the time. And we would mix, I can't remember what part it was, but part alcohol, part aloe vera. And I would go down to the nurse's station and we would mix them together since she was the nurse, I guess. And we would make alcohol. Now, homemade hand sanitizer is awful. And a lot of times you would walk into a place not knowing if it was going to be homemade hand sanitizer or regular hand sanitizer. And homemade hand sanitizer, it just stinks and it leaves your hands feeling stickier. And just the fact that I know that is just wild. But so we would make our own hand sanitizer, even though we had plenty, but we had all this alcohol. Let's see what else. Oh, another one of the COVID logic things that make no sense was that all the drive-thrus started having these plexiglass. I mean, there's plexiglass everywhere. Every interaction you would have with somebody would have plexiglass at any counter or anyways. Where was I that just recently they had gotten rid of their plexiglass? Oh, at my therapist's office. Just recently they got rid of their plexiglass. But everywhere. And so drive-thrus would have, you know, normally the window opens like this, and they would now have plexiglass like here, and that would stay, and then the door would still go back and forth behind that plexiglass. And the reason I remembered that recently is because I was at the McDonald's drive-thru and I saw this tape all around it, like residue. And I was like, what is that? And I was like, oh my gosh, that was from the plexiglass. And it looked so funny, especially at first. It looked like somebody was like, oh my gosh, what do we do? What do we do? Somebody stick some glass up there and just like throw something up. It was ridiculous, especially when, you know, we know now, and the research was fairly limited, but also fairly ignored just because of fear. Because we know how things like this spread, and it is within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more. You're not having that in the drive-thru. You're not having 15 minutes or more of contact in a drive-thru. The COVID logic is exhausting. And you know, we're almost 2 years out now. In 4 months it'll be 2 years, and I am so glad that we are not doing that crap anymore. Mom and I went out to eat just recently, and we were standing in a crowded waiting room of the lobby of the restaurant, really crowded, and I just looked at her and I was like, I'm so glad we're not in COVID anymore, that we can all stand in this waiting room together and not be scared and just freaking out about it all. You know, it was just really, really annoying. Another thing that became, I don't know, a trend through the COVID pandemic were 3 main things: home improvement projects, baking bread, and tie-dyeing. I think it's because there wasn't a lot to do whenever we had to stay home, and those are 3 things that you could do at home. We did do home improvement projects at my parents' house, like a lot. It started with the bathroom and then the kitchen, and we tore down a wall and they replaced all the carpets with hardwood. Just so many things like that we did during COVID. I mean, people had time to kill, they were home a lot more, and then they had the government checks that came in. And so, yeah, we did a lot of home improvement projects. I did bake bread once or twice during the pandemic, and then I didn't tie-dye for a while. And I remember it was getting into the summer and I was like, I really need a tie-dye project. I need a tie-dye COVID project. And I have a sweatshirt now. That is my COVID tie-dye sweatshirt. See what else? I think that almost wraps it up. Our family was supposed to go on 2 trips in April of 2020, one to see our very favorite comedian in Tulsa, and another one, I don't really remember what the other one is right now. And then we were supposed to have a cruise in June. Of course, that never happened either. And there was just a lot of disappointment. My sister was supposed to go to Canada that summer. She was supposed to go to Las Vegas like the week after the pandemic started. She had to move home from college. I went down there and packed up all of her stuff with her and drove her back home. So she stayed at home. It was just a very, very traumatic, life-altering event for so many people. There were so many lives that were changed. I ended up moving to Missouri in October of 2020, and I think it is partially related to the pandemic. My job really slowed down. There wasn't as much to do anymore, and just so many things were impacted by the pandemic. It's really wild to think about. And, you know, as frustrated as I get with the COVID logic and the things that people did that made no freaking sense, and the policies that were put into place and all of those things, I think it was smart at first, at least, to not travel as much and not to do as many events. I think the extremes that people went to was a little much, but it was just a lot of fear, and people were just very scared and didn't know what was going to happen. But we didn't really know how to treat COVID at the beginning, and so if we would have continued traveling and it would have been as bad as it got, you know, in January, February of 2021, it was a lot worse. There was a lot more COVID. And if that would have happened in March of 2020, did I say January, February of 2020? I meant 2021. But if that would have happened in March of 2020, I think it would have been a lot harder on healthcare and treatment options and that sort of thing. And so I think that part was wise. I think it was a very frustrating, a long time. I think at this point there's very little left over COVID policies, besides like the shifts that were made to like work from home and stuff like that. Like there's still a lot of that. Like I do foster care, and a lot of our meetings are over Zoom, which is super helpful. But that was not the case before COVID. And so there are some things like that are still in place and that are just beneficial. But for the most part, there's not, you know, plexiglass everywhere. That's pretty rare. We do have like a must-wear signs mask at work that's gotten covered up by other signs. You could still see, you know, Walmart used to have these things on the floor about 6 feet apart and stuff, and those are gone. A lot of places used to have stuff like that are gone. So it is really back to normal, but it took a very, very long time. I would even say the beginning of 2020, it was still, 2022, it was still a lot of that stuff happening. When you would first eat out, tables were marked off like every other table. And that was spread out when we went back to church, because churches were shut down for a long time. we went back and in May. Some people went back in April, but most of them were in May or June. And all the seats were marked off or spread out. And I did that for our chapel as well. At the place I worked at, we had church service every week. And I spread out the chairs for that. So there was a lot of just life changes. It was huge. And I do think that it is a very serious disease or illness, whatever you would call it. But just the overreaction of the fear was really difficult. And my uncle passed away from COVID last year in September. And so it is very serious, and even our family was impacted in that way. But just the overall life changes were very traumatic, and I think everyone has a story similar to that, where this is where I was, and this is how it immediately impacted my life and the things that were changed due to COVID. So anyways, I just wanted to document my story and share a little bit. I think I've kind of covered everything. I'm gonna do my mascara now because it's kind of hard to do while I'm talking. So that's all.